President Biden is in Jerusalem today and delivered a series of Biden-esque remarks from start to finish. I want to read a one here, Dan Cohen from MintPress News, and get your reaction to it, see what it says about what it tells us about Biden's approach to the region. So he said this standing in East Jerusalem. He said, quote, "The background of my family is Irish-American, and we have a long history not fundamentally unlike the Palestinian people, with Great Britain and their attitude toward Irish Catholics over the years for 400 years." This isn't the first time that Biden has connected his own Irish heritage to a kind of support for oppressed and struggling people. He's done it in the past when it comes to the question of immigration, because his family fled, during the potato famine, which no doubt he considers the fault of British policy. So how do you square kind of Biden's approach to the Israel-Palestinian question with this stated affinity for the struggle of the Palestinian people?
Well, to me, it's pretty hypocritical, because Biden has continued the same U.S. policy, which has been total support for Israeli apartheid and permanent subjugation of millions of Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, who live under what is an Israeli military dictatorship where they have no rights, can be imprisoned, tortured, assassinated at any point. And so it's just sheer hypocrisy of Biden to even try to express some kind of sympathy for the Palestinian struggle when the United States, with Biden now as the president, lording over, giving total support to Israel, lording over the Palestinians.
It's always interesting to watch establishment Democrats sort of do their gymnastics on the question of Israel, which I'm on the other side, probably as both of you of, but he made this remark. We've been covering the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, just egregious, and not covered well by a lot of the generally sort of pro-Israel people. And he was referring to the killing and just made a very Biden-esque gaffe, but I think a particularly hurtful one. We can roll that clip.
The United States has suffered loss as well, including the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh.
Oh man, that is a tough one. It's the same as when he said yesterday that we would, earlier this week, that we would honor the Holocaust. The same level of just like unbelievable walking into just terrible statements. I don't want to read too much into what happened, what he was actually thinking and what came out of his mouth. But I do want to ask Dan how Biden's mistakes on this level, are they, when he goes on these trips and he makes these kinds of mistakes, are they interfering, you think, with his ability to get anything done when he's trying to talk to leaders in Palestine, when he's going to Saudi Arabia, which he said, he would not be talking to Mohammed bin Salman? Does anybody basically take him seriously, or do they think maybe somebody else is running the country?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious to everyone that this is kind of an emperor wears no clothes situation, where Biden's mental faculties are clearly degraded to the point where he just said Shireen Abu Al-QAEDA is what it sounded like to me, which, if the U.S. is trying to win hearts and minds of the Palestinians, then obviously that's a major failure. But that's really just kind of the cherry on top of U.S. policy that, pretty much any Palestinian who's not on the payroll of the Palestinian Authority, which is supported by the U.S. and Israel, understands. They understand reality that the U.S. is responsible for their situation with unbridled support to Israel. So it's, you can only imagine how the media would have been reacting had Trump made that kind of gaffe. But I think it's going to be another one of those things that Biden says something incredibly inappropriate and embarrassing because he just should not be in this position. And it's going to be overlooked, glossed over by the national media largely.
I also want to get your take on his upcoming trip to Saudi Arabia, where he will, he came up with this compromise way that he's going to sit down with Mohammed bin Salman by allowing him to be in the room with the king and with some of the king's other advisors. But there's been significant reorientation over the last several years of Middle Eastern power dynamics with the linking together of Israel's, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, effectively. And so I want to get your take on the structural reasons behind that. And to me, I'm wondering what you think it has to do with the way that the U.S. has, pretty much, effectively sanctioned a lot of the other kind of oil-producing countries around the world, whether it's Iran, whether it's Venezuela, and recently, of course, Russia as well. You then wind up with this situation where a client state ends up having leverage over the empire. The United States developed its Middle Eastern strategy so that it would have access to resources. You can agree or disagree with whether that's a moral thing to do. That was the thing that they did. But now that they're the only place that they can get resources, it feels like Saudi Arabia feels like it has the leverage over the United States rather than the other way around. What do you think is going on now in the region?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, energy supplies are in crisis since February when the Ukraine crisis really kicked off and the U.S. cut off Russian oil supplies, and we've seen gas prices overall, inflation skyrocket, but gas prices skyrocket in general. And so that's what, Americans are dealing with. And so Biden is going to Saudi Arabia with that in mind. And I think, the broader picture for the U.S. is that it's about great power competition. It's about combating Chinese and Russian influence in the Middle East and really throughout the world. And so the Biden administration, Biden has really put himself, and the Democrats in general, I think, have put themselves in a very difficult position because they were, during the campaign, they were denouncing Mohammed bin Salman and saying, that he was a pariah and Saudi Arabia was a pariah state. And now they are basically going back and saying, well, we essentially need you. There was a huge deal made by the U.S. over the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, which, regardless of what happened, it's obvious to me that the U.S. didn't make such a huge deal of that because of the immorality of killing a journalist, considering the U.S. is basically underwritten, is basically totally fine with killing the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. There's no punishment there, or the imprisonment and extradition of Julian Assange that the United States is seeking. So by doing that, by portraying Saudi Arabia as this pariah state, and now basically going back in order to reassert itself and have these relations, and Saudi Arabia is now in a more powerful position, and it can look to other countries like Russia. I mean, we know that Saudi Arabia has under Mohammed bin Salman has warm relationships with President Putin, and that's a major source. That's a major point of leverage that it has. That the United States is not the only game in town, and so I think the real point of this trip, as I was just listening to the press gaggle on Air Force One while Biden is en route to Saudi Arabia. And they were saying, we have to plant the American flag in the region, and we don't want to, pull back. We need to recalibrate. So it's all about recalibrating what is essentially just American empire in the region. And, for all of the talk about morality and Saudi Arabia being some kind of pariah state, the U.S. continues to underwrite this genocidal war on Yemen, and there's no talk about that, even though Biden was praised for saying he would end it, which he never did. So really, it's just all about politics. There's no morality or anything that comes into it.
I think we tried to plant our flag in the region, some years ago. And Dan, I wanted to ask you've been working on a documentary, and it's coming out, I believe, actually today over at MintPress. What can you tell us about it?
Well, the documentary is called Gaza Fights Back, and it chronicles the May 2021 attack on the Gaza Strip, the fourth in 12 years. And it shows how actually the armed resistance forces, the armed wing of Hamas, really changed the game and were able to intervene in Jerusalem as opposed to just, try to defend Gaza from Israeli attacks. And so it's got some really unique interviews, and we talked to a lot of survivors, people who lost loved ones, family members. So I think it'll be a real contribution to understanding what's happening in the country and even how it affects the region.
Sounds good. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.